So the elements of reasoning, we often describe them as the parts of thinking. They're elements, the way the chemical elements are the parts of all substances. Well, the elements of reasoning are the parts of all reasoning. So there are 8 of them. Briefly, they are purpose, assumptions, implications, um, point of view, information, and a few others, 8 of them altogether. And the idea is that whenever you reason about anything, you always have a purpose. You're always making assumptions. There are always implications and consequences. You're always doing so from some point of view or multiple points of view. Point of view is another element of reasoning. You're always addressing a question. That's 5 of them. So the elements of reasoning are the parts of thinking. And all 8 of these are essential. Purpose is one of them. So the idea is whenever we think about something, whenever we're reasoning our way through something, we have a purpose. We have a purpose in mind or in the back of our mind. Purposes are sometimes unconscious. We have a purpose, we have a goal or goals, we have objectives, something we're trying to achieve. So how does purpose fit with the other elements of reasoning? Well, for this, I could say actually 2 opposite things or nearly opposite things. One is that purpose underlies all the other 7. So if I'm a teacher and my goal, my purpose is to teach my students to write better, to write more critically, meaning more clearly, more accurately, with greater sense of what's relevant to the issue at hand. So my purpose is to teach my students to write better. Well, having that purpose generates for me assumptions. Like an assumption I'm making is that I can make an appreciable difference for my students by teaching them about writing, that they'll be able to write better. An implication of it might be that they are in fact writing better. That purpose generates a point of view. The point of view is a pedagogical point of view, the teacher's point of view, and that's the one I'm approaching the whole thing from. So purpose, in a way, underlies all the other elements. So that's one thing I'm going to say. Next thing I'm going to say seems in a way almost the opposite, but it's not really the opposite. It's that what I've just said about purpose, I could also say about any of the other elements. Any one of the elements underlies all 7. So take assumptions. That's one of the elements of reasoning. I'm always making an assumption. So if I assume that it's very important for my students to be able to write more clearly, to be able to write better and more accurately, well, that generates the purpose. The purpose is, oh, okay, so my purpose is to teach my students to write better. So on the one hand, it looks like purpose comes first and assumptions come second. On the other way of reading it, oftentimes in life, assumptions come first or come earlier than purpose. Similarly, implications and consequences. So if I realize that an implication of an implication of learning to write is that my students are going to write better, and an implication of not teaching them to write means they're not going to be as successful in their life and their careers later on, that can then generate the purpose. Or just take point of view. If I'm a teacher, my point of view is that of a teacher. I want to teach my students how to do things. And that means how to think about things and then carry them out. So I might then say, okay, in keeping with that point of view, so what are my goals? And I ask myself that question. Notice I haven't begun with my goals, my purpose. I've begun with my point of view. So that's something that's true of the elements of reasoning. They interlock with one another, they interweave, and there's no one that goes first. That said, I can say for the purpose of our work today, I can say we can think of purpose as underlying all the other 7. So it's very easy to identify my purpose or my goals in doing X, Y, or Z. But sometimes it's just extremely difficult, or it's very complicated. And it's remarkable, as you mentioned, that we're much of the time quite unaware of our goals. or
Mm-hmm.
even if we are aware of them, we forget that awareness as we go through life. Many people want to get rich in order to be happy. That's their goal.
Mm-hmm.
But they devote themselves to getting rich and they kind of lose the happiness part of it because they're engaged in making more money. Crude
Mhm.
example, but
Mhm.
yes.
Right. Well, it's hard to talk about one of the elements without talking about the other elements, as you've mentioned. So
Right.
if that, taking your example, if that's the way that the person is thinking, then they're actually not thinking through the implications of actively pursuing that purpose. Because
Mhm.
if they think that just making money is going to make them happy,
Mhm.
then that's then they need to rethink. They need to think through the implications of that belief, and actually imagine themselves in that position, and would that really be what made them happy? You see what I mean? We're not good at thinking through implications when we
Right.
think about our purposes.
Right. Right. And yeah, and thinking about purpose actually helps you see implications more clearly. It's part of what you said about becoming aware of our purposes, or our goals in doing anything.
Yes. So, um,
Can I ask you something?
yes.
So one thing we were talking about earlier is, so it's not just a matter of identifying my purpose, or my goals. It's also a matter of evaluating them, right? And I'd like to ask you, what do you think about that, or how does it work to be evaluating my purposes, that they're not
Yes.
given?
Yes. It's interesting. That was exactly what I was on that line of thought, because I think that when we do use the elements of reasoning, and when we do actively use the concept of purpose, it frequently is, or these processes are frequently done in a somewhat superficial way. So
Mhm.
that we say, okay, well, what's the purpose of science? Now that can be taken deeply or superficially.
Mhm.
But we sort of think, okay, you're just going to apply it to science, or you're just going to apply it to this little problem or that little problem. And
Mhm.
any of those may be significant in themselves. So I don't want to diminish that point. But in pursuing these questions, and let's say playing by the rules, okay, what's my purpose right now? Okay, what's my purpose right now? Okay, let's use the word purpose, and then by thinking of it that way, we're sort of missing the whole boat of critical thinking in the way that I think of critical thinking, because critical thinking should set you free. If it does nothing else,
Mhm.
it should set you free as a thinker. And part of that freedom comes with achieving and pursuing purposes that have deep meaning for you personally, and that connect with your ability to achieve your own capacity in a
Right.
world that is largely pathological.
Mm.
So we can't pretend as if we're reasoning in some kind of a sane world that's always sane and reasonable.
Mhm.
We're reasoning in a world that's just full of potholes everywhere. Yes, there's a road. Yes, we can get there, but we're falling into a lot of holes along the way as thinkers.
Mhm.
So what I'm saying is that we're not, I guess I could say it this way, we're not thinking critically, we're not using the elements of reasoning well, and here we're focusing on purpose, either to deal with these individual questions or the deepest questions for us personally,
Yeah.
which are focused on what we highly value, and I guess in which we have belief in our ability to achieve these purposes.
Right. That last one, you mentioned, seems particularly poignant to me, because part of evaluating goals or purposes in society, but I'm thinking much more on a personal level, is really coming to terms with whether it's realistic to think of me as achieving them, to think of myself as being able to achieve them.